somewhere back in the long ago, where he can still believe there's a place in my life.
All right, good morning, class. Hope everyone is doing well on this Thursday morning. It is November the 17th. Currently, just 4 minutes past 9 o'clock in the morning. It is time for another class of PLAR history and geography here at WASA in Sulico. This is term 1B. We started term 1B last class. Once again, my name is Jonathan and I am your teacher for this course. Again, if you have any questions, just get a hold of me. And please, and I mean please, continue to work on your assignments. I noticed that my current smartboard screen has been updated, has a little new software to it, so it kind of looks slightly different, but I'm sure all the gadgets on it is exactly the same. But again, feel free to call in and listen and participate. Just simply call the WASA studio, either at home or at your learning center. Again, if your learning center is not open at this time, you feel free to call in at home. That way you can still listen, participate, and engage in our learning as well. Again, always ask questions if you need any help. Don't be discouraged if you're stuck or need any help or assistance on your course material, your assignments, as you can navigate through it. Just give me a call, either at my office. If I'm not there, just leave a message. My cell is on the screen as well. An email, send me an email, or send me a message on Facebook. Just send me a little inbox as well. Okay, so again, many ways to get a hold of me. Make sure you take advantage of that. Again, review materials are on the archive page and is also posted on my YouTube channel, which is also linked to my Facebook as well. Office hours are the same. We already talked about that. Again, remember, for this course, you need your textbook, which contains all the lessons 1 to 5 for history and geography. And you also need your workbook. So hopefully everyone has that all figured out as well. Your workbook contains all of your assignments and lessons that you need to complete. Again, history and geography. If you have internet access, make sure you download Smart Bridget. That way you can see what we're posting. I notice that we got Wasa front desk TV logged on right now with us, so that's awesome. And that's that. I got one announcement to make note for in regards to next week's class. Okay, so next week class, week number 2, which is next week, we're doing back-to-back classes. Okay, we're doing back-to-back classes. I'm switching classes with Bonnie, PLAR math teacher here at WASA, since she is away in a workshop or conference. So which means that Bonnie will be taking my Tuesday morning class, and I'll be taking her Wednesday afternoon time slot. Okay, so that's the only switch that we're making. Therefore, for our history and geography next week will be on Wednesday at 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we'll also have our normal time slot on Thursday, like always, at 9 till 10 in the morning. Okay, so that's history and geography next week. Okay, so we're doing back-to-back days in terms of classes. So Wednesday in the afternoon, 2 to 3 p.m. Central Time, and we'll have our normal time slot as always on Thursday, 9 to 10 in the morning. Okay, so again, I'll send a little email out to all the DEC. Again, I'll remind the students of this near the end of today's class, posted on my Facebook timeline, and so forth. So that's what's happening next week in terms of class time. Okay, so a little switch in terms of Tuesday and Wednesday. Again, Wednesday 2 to 3 in the afternoon, and Thursday as normally scheduled. Okay, any questions in regards to that? If you do, feel free just ask. Alrighty, if there's no questions or concerns, let's begin today's class lesson. So, last week, we ended the class where I posted 2 questions. What do you know about Canadian history? And what do you want to learn about Canadian history? Okay, so what do you know about Canadian history? And what do you want to learn about Canadian history? So hopefully, class and students had time to reflect on this, think about it, um, to see whether or not you know a lot, know a little. If there's something you want to learn, is something you're not sure of, or something you want to know more about. Hopefully, we can answer those questions throughout this course when we looked at Canadian history. Okay, so just keep that in mind in terms of what you know and what you want to learn. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So before we begin today's class, let's just quickly go over some background content to give the class a little background in terms of what Canada was like at the start. Okay, so again, creating Canada, our country, we came into Confederation as a result of many different factors, not just one, but many factors. As we recall, Canada came into Confederation in 1867. So when we were officially a nation that was created. It was all because of timing and the current place. Okay, just timing, perfect timing, perfect reason to join Confederation and be a country of our own. Again, I listed some factors. Again, you don't need to know these factors, but I just listed them. So one was the change in the British attitude. Two, a fear of American invasion. Three, lost free trade with the United States. Four, the creation of the railway system. Five, Canadians were unhappy with the government at that time. And six, simply the idea of joining or being part of Confederation. Again, it all goes back into timing, place, the right circumstance, and just being at the right time, the right place to join Confederation in 1867. When Canada joined Confederation in 1867, we only had 4 provinces. Okay, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Again, Ontario and Quebec wasn't that big as we know as today. It was mainly just a part of Upper and Lower Canada and parts of New Brunswick and parts of Nova Scotia on the East Coast. But as you can see, as time progressed, more provinces and territories joined Confederation and emerged. Okay, so now we have 10 provinces and 3 territories in our country. The Indian Act of 1867. Again, my goal is to integrate as much indigenous content and culture into our lessons. I think it's important, especially when looking at Canadian history. The Indian Act had many revisions as time went on, but in terms of 1867, the purpose and the goal of the Indian Act was to replace tradition of First Nation political structure. All reserve activities were subjected to supervision by the white bureaucracy or the white individual. In theory, it was based on reserve why reserves were created based to isolate Aboriginal people and to allow them to learn European, the civilized way at their own pace to become part of the white society when they are ready. But in a way that did not happen. So in reality, reserves brought First Nation people closer together in terms of political and social arrangement or in maintaining their identity. Okay. So again, just a little background content in terms of what Canada looked like at the start of Confederation, and then as we navigate through our timeline in terms of different decades, a different time period, hopefully class and students will see changes, what stay the same, different historical perspectives, arguments, and so forth. Okay, this is why we're all adding these little facts in there. So what was Canada like at the end of the 19th century, okay, or the 1800s, okay? Well, there were growth in industries in some areas. There were railroad systems that was created, which was significant in terms of increase in the numbers of immigration, especially out west. We'll talk more about that very briefly. And with the railway, we deliver resources. There's also this time period of increase in opportunities, industrializations, created modern cities. But in other words, in a short period of time, Canada went massive change. Okay, there's lots of changes happening. Um, you'll see more changes develop as we move through different decades and timelines and periods. But again, lots of changes are being created. Which brings to us to today's actual lesson, which is entitled Canada Early 1900s, or Canada in the early 1900s. Again, this is lesson number 1. This is where we're starting. This is on page 1 in your textbooks. So hopefully class and students all have your textbook in front of you as we go through the next couple of slides in today's lesson. That way you can highlight, circle, underline key words, key paragraphs, key pages that will help you in terms of your assignments and your lesson. Okay, but again, we're starting at lesson number 1 from the very top, page 1 in your textbook. Okay, so I'll give the class a couple seconds to flip to that page. Okay, but again, lesson number 1, starting with history first with this course, and then we'll switch halfway through and look at geography. But our focus right now at the moment is history. History, Canadian history in the early 1900s or the early 20th century. Let's get to today's class learning goals. Again, I will always try to post learning goals at the start of each lesson. That way class and students can follow along and see what they're actually learning. And then they can go back and look at their learning goals to see if they understood what we talked about. Okay, so our learning goals for today, by the end of today's class, you will be able to understand Wilfrid Laurier's goals, to understand the challenges immigrants encounter or the challenges and struggles that immigrants had to overcome, to understand what women or women's lived experience were like, either in the home or at work. Okay, so these are our main goals that we're going to focus on in terms of today's lesson, which we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes. Okay, so again, keep these learning goals in mind. At the end of it, we'll go back and look at it and see if we actually achieve these goals. This is what we're trying to accomplish in terms of our learning and our understanding. Okay, questions in regards to our learning goals? Okay, hopefully it's clear, it's precise, um, to help guide you in your learning. So let's start things off by looking at Wilfrid Laurier. Again, there's a little brief paragraph on him on page 1 in your textbook. Okay, so I'm going to jot this down. Hopefully it will help you later on when you look at your assignments. So Wilfrid Laurier was Canada's Prime Minister during this time period. You may recognize him because he is on our Canadian $5 bill. So if you're curious, you can reach into your pocket, pull out a $5 bill, and you'll see his face on it. So Wilfrid Laurier, like I said, was Canada's prime minister at the start of this decade, at the start of the 1900s. Okay, yeah, you don't need to know the year when he was in office. Just note that he was Canada's prime minister at the start of this decade. When Laurier was in office, he had a couple goals that he wanted to achieve. One, Canada's development of Western provinces, which actually came true because in 1905, he had two more provinces. He created Saskatchewan and he created Alberta. Okay, so that was his goal, and he accomplished his goal in creating two new provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta, in terms of expanding Western Canada and Western provinces. He also wanted to build up the railway system, the railway, okay, which is also significant in terms of trading and sending resources and other goods back and forth, east to west, in terms of Canada. Okay, so now we have a system where we can transport goods and resources from the east coast all the way to the west coast. And Laurier wanted to control his own defense, or have Canada's control its own defense policies for protection purposes. Okay, so these were Laurier's goals when he was in office. This is what his legacy was. This is what he was known for. But in other words, Canada in the 20th century during this time period, it was the land of promises, so the land of opportunities. Okay, things were changing, lots of optimism, land of promises. Okay, so that's Wilfrid Laurier. Again, we can go way more depth into what Laurier uh, goals and achievements were, but we're just going to highlight a few. And they were Canada's development of Western provinces, build up railroads, and own defenses. Okay. Again, all this is in your textbook. I will always add some additional facts and knowledge as we go along. But again, in terms of everything in regards to answering your assignments, all the answers are in your textbook. So again, this is on page 1 in your textbook. The next paragraph below talks about the Boer War. Again, I'm going to change things up and not go into background content in regards to the Boer War. Um, the textbook briefly talks about it. If you want more information about it, we can discuss it, or you can look it up, in other words. But we're going to just look at its lasting impact or its significance in regards to Canadian history. Okay, let's look at its impact. Before we do that, I just want to note two things in regards to this time period. One, Canada, even though Canada joined Confederation in 1867, Canada's own country, one, we were still influenced by the British Empire. Okay, the British Empire. Basically, we were a colony of the British Empire, and they still in a way controlled what Canada did in terms of all the policies um, and other factors as well. So basically, whatever Britain did at the time, Canada had to participate and obey in a way. Two, secondly, what we need to know about Canada during this time period is that we have two main identities or groups. They were English and they were French. Okay, English and French. They were the main groups that dominated Canada during this time period. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, one, Canada was a part of the British Empire, and two, the two main dominant groups in Canada, English and the French speaking groups. So the Boer War, well, Quebec or the French-speaking Canadians did not sympathize with the Boer War. They did not go overseas and fight and participate. Again, the Boer War is also known as the South African War, which took place in South Africa. Again, Britain wanted to invade this part of South Africa as they thought that they had gold, diamonds, and other resources. So a war broke out. This is known as the South African War or the Boer War. Since Britain took part, Canada also took part as well, which led to the Boer War being Canada's first overseas war. It was the first foreign war as well. It was important because it increased Canada's identity as an English nation. Okay, it increased Canada's identity as an English nation. The French saw it as a foreign entanglement that was none of Canada's business. As a result, French Canadians did not participate and volunteered and help out. This all goes back into their idea of freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of speech that came about in terms of the French Revolution in 1789. Okay, so again, two groups in Canada have conflict, different opposing views. English said yes, they helped out, and French said no, we don't want to partake. That's why it increased Canada's identity as an English nation. It also gave Canada's confidence to participate in international events, demonstrated that Canada could be its own nation, and again, like I said, it increased Canada's tension between the English-speaking and the French-speaking um, within Canada. We'll see more about that when we talk about World War One next week, but again, keep that in mind. Canada's part of the British Empire, and the French-speaking Canadians in Canada. Okay, very, very important. So that was the Boer War, also known as South African War, a foreign war that took place in South Africa, a war between South Africa and Britain, but Canada partake in it as well. Okay, again, that's on paragraph 2 on page 1. It's not our main goal that we want to focus on, but again, just note that Canada is the British part of the British Empire, and that there are English and speaking, French speaking groups in Canada. At the bottom of page 1, it starts looking at immigration, and it goes all the way towards the next page as well. Okay, so again, this is on page 1, page 2, in your textbook. Immigration, again, big topic. We can talk about it all day long, but again, I'm going to highlight some key points in regards to immigration. Again, immigration is a huge part of Canadian identity. Basically, everyone other than First Nation is a part of somewhat descent of immigration from other countries. So just keep that in mind. So, immigration. So between 1901 and 1921, we had approximately about 3 million newcomers. Okay, 3 million newcomers. Okay, so in a short period of time, in about 20 years, we had 3 million newcomers that came to Canada. Okay, the population of Canada in 1921 was roughly just under 9 million. Okay, just under 9 million. The population of Canada nowadays is approximately 35, 36 million, give or take. Okay, so again, see that there has been growth, but back in the day, we had an exponential growth in terms of immigrants and newcomers in Canada. Again, I have a little chart here that hopefully illustrate the growth. Again, we're talking about our little time period, 1900s, 1912 or so. Note that there has been a large increase of newcomers that came to Canada, okay, compared to other decades and other years in the past, okay. So you may have asked yourself, well, why are there so many newcomers or new immigrants coming to Canada during this time period? What are the reasons? What are the factors? Yeah, there are a lot of people coming, but why? What makes Canada so attractive um, that intrigue other people from other places around the world? Okay. Are there any thoughts, any questions, or any comments in regards to why you think so many newcomers came to Canada? Think about it for a sec. Talk about it with your classmates and peers if they're there with you. But why do you think there are so many? Okay. Well, I can't not name them all. There are so many different factors that led to this growth. One was the Yukon Gold Rush, okay, which is not in your textbook, I believe, but it was a factor in a way. Okay. So I think in the super late 1800s, just before the 1900s, there was a period where known as the Yukon Gold Rush. People from around the world heard that there was gold in Yukon, again, part of northern Canada. Okay, again, gold, everyone wanted to be wealthy and rich. So a lot of people from around the world heard about this and decided to change their fortune. They came to Yukon in search for gold, but in the end, not many people found gold, even though it was there to an extent. But after that period of the Yukon Gold Rush, a lot of the newcomers came and just settled and lived in Canada. So that's one factor, but there are other factors as well. Okay, and those factors can be categorized in terms of push and pull factors. Okay, I like to call them push and pull factors. Okay, factors where Canada's pulling new immigrants to come, and factors where people want to leave their own countries for other factors and reasons. So it could be push factors, could be ethical or religious factors. There could be tensions in their countries back home, urban crisis, industrial uphaul, collapse of their presence, and farming factors as well. But factors that pulled people, factors that Canada had, was that Canada had a strong economy. We had high wages. We had technology, agriculture, and machinery that improved transportation for goods and people. And Canada was simply just known as the land of opportunity. People just wanted to change their fortune, um, take on a little adventure, decided to come to Canada and settle because of these reasons. Okay, hence why there was a great number in growth in terms of immigration. Again, a lot of these immigrations settled out west because out west was a period of expanding and growth during this time period. So a lot of these newcomers came and settled out west. Hence why there was rapid growth in Western Canada, and about 1 million people came and settled out west in Canada. Okay, so again, there are many factors that led to why people want to come and leave their own countries and settle in Canada. Again, we can always dive deeper into this content, but just some surface that we're just gonna touch on. So again, these are little factors why people want to come to Canada. The next couple of slides, we're going to talk about challenges and struggles, and they mainly revolve around race and racism. Hopefully, we have heard these terms before in terms of what is race. Okay, not running a race, but what is race and what is racism? Okay, we hear these factors in the media and all around us, but what are they? So I have posted a little definition of each one, and hopefully it will expand your understanding and help you to understand the next couple slides coming up. So what is race? Well, race is identifying a distinct population based on the basis of appearance, culture, ethnicity, and social economic status. Okay, just the way it is. Okay, a group, a distinct population based on its appearance, culture, ethnicity, and so forth status. Okay, that is race. Okay, racism, on the other hand, is treating a particular population or group or individual differently based on social constructed values. Okay, something that they cannot necessarily control. Okay, it was just a social norm. It was socially constructed based on those values, and because of values, we treat them differently. Okay, so that's racism. Okay, any questions so far, class and students? Awesome. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, just feel free to interrupt and ask those questions. So immigration and racism. Again, there are a lot of challenges and struggles that came about in regards to immigrants. Okay? Again, I really want to emphasize that. Okay. So for example, Chinese immigrants, again, this is on the top of page 2. Okay, page 2 in your textbook, where it starts to talk about the challenges and struggles in regards to immigrants. Okay, so we're going to look at the Chinese Canadian, okay, Chinese Canadian, in regards to their struggles and challenges as well. They were despised by taking all the jobs when they came to Canada, and the federal government lobbied to deport them back to the homeland of China. So what happened was that in 1885, the Canadian federal government set up something known as the Chinese federal head tax. Okay, the head tax, which is basically paying a fee or paying taxes if they want to come live in Canada. Okay, does that seem fair? Probably not. So in 1885, if any Chinese immigrants wanted to come live in Canada, they had to pay $50. Okay, so they had to pay $50 to come live in Canada. A few years later, in 1901, that Chinese federal head tax increased to $100. Okay, it doubled in value, $100. And 3 years later, in 1904, it jumped to $500. Okay, so 1904, any Chinese immigrants wanting to come live in Canada, they had to pay $500, which is a lot of money back then. Even nowadays, presently, $500 is a lot of money. But put that into content back then, over 100 years ago, that's a lot of money. There's a lot of money. So again, this is a way to discourage Chinese immigrants to come live in Canada during this time period. Okay, those that did live in Canada, they were segregated, had to live in its own distinct area known as Chinatown in a way. But again, the main focus here is that they had to pay taxes or extra money if they want to live in Canada. So what happened was that people who came to live in Canada and they wanted to go back to China, live a couple of years and see their family and come back to Canada, uh, they had to pay $500 more. Okay, so again, more money. So again, this is a way to discourage these population. But that didn't stop there. There are more challenges and struggles. A lot of them settle again out west in BC. A lot of Asian immigrants lived out there just to isolate them and to control them to an extent. Asian Canadians, whether they were Chinese, Japanese, you name it, they were denied the right to vote. They were barred from entering several jobs and professions. Again, they were segregated to live in public places. They were threatened with violence and a lot of discrimination or discriminatory in regards to housing policies and other factors as well. So again, they were denied a lot of basic rights that other Canadians, whether English or French, had access to. So again, a lot of challenges and struggles that they had to overcome. Again, do you think that's fair? Do you think that's right? Do you think that's wrong? What do you think should happen because of this? Okay. Question to think about. Okay. Question to think about. So again, how would you feel if you want to live in a more urban setting or live in a city and you had to pay money to leave your community? Okay. Do you think that's fair? I think that's right. Again, put yourself in their position and their shoe back then. Again, keeping in mind that this was just in a way the way it was back then. Keep in mind the time and the context that we're looking at. Okay. So again, it comes up to the question why. Okay. Why did all this happen? Again, we can't just single out Asian immigrants. Again, a lot of this affect other groups as well. But we're just going to focus on one particular group. But again, this all in a way affect everyone, all new immigrants from other countries, all ages, all gender to a certain extent. Okay, just keep that in mind. But why did all this happen? Again, keep in mind the content at the time and place. In the early 1900s or the early 20th century, Canadians feared immigration. Okay, they feared immigration. They feared the unknown. Okay, they feared the unknown. English Canadians saw foreigners as a threat to the dominant British culture. Okay, so again, during this time period, Canada was dominated by the British Empire, were influenced by their economy, policies, traditions, way of life. So they saw immigrants as a threat to the dominant British culture. Again, going back to that idea of maintaining their identity and culture. French Canadians, on the other hand, feared that they would lose their identity, way of living, and culture and be absorbed in an English society where they would lose their French and be absorbed into the majority mainstream of English society. Okay, because of these small factors, there were a lot of discrimination, racism, hates, violence, you name it. Okay, lots of factors. Again, some of these factors can even be seen in terms of today's way of living. Okay, so can anyone think of examples where they see racism happening or hate happening? Okay, feel free to share it with our class and our colleagues, and feel free to, I don't know, send me an email, post a little link on it, share your ideas and thoughts with the class. Okay. Oh, and the struggles and challenges did not stop there. It just continued. So we're going to talk about the hardship. Okay, page 2 in your textbook. Okay, racism and hate and all those are just a small fraction of what happened. We can even expand that into more. Okay, so immigrants hardship. In other words, more challenges and struggles that they had to overcome. One, language. English was not their first language, hence it was difficult to communicate. Very, very important. Okay, very important. Okay, in terms of language. If we cannot understand or speak the same dialect or language, we cannot communicate. So again, that's a challenge that they had to overcome. In other words, others had to learn English or other languages in order to communicate normally and function normally. Again, different race, different religion. They were isolated, living in certain areas. The weather, it was cold. Canada's cold. Okay, Canada's known as a cold nation, and most of them, most immigrants, were not used to it. Okay, not used to it. They did not have the proper farming tools, or they cannot afford it yet. They had very little education. They were unable to articulate their reading and writing skills. So again, more ways that further their communication skills. They often work in dangerous jobs that most others wouldn't take. So again, construction, built in the railway system across Canada, and they were often paid less compared to others because of their race and identity. And again, poor housing, which can relate to living in isolation. Okay. Again, just a small list that is in your textbook. We can always add to this list. Okay, if we want to brainstorm and contribute to it. But again, it's just some common hardship that new immigrants had to overcome with time. Okay, so again, not an easy or smooth transition into their living lives. Again, that is on page 2 in your textbook. We're almost done today's lesson. I think there's two more topics I'm going to talk about. One is women in work, and one more is foreign policies, and then we're done for today. Any questions so far at this point? Awesome. Good stuff, class. Work and women, women and work. Okay, so now we're going to talk about gender. Okay, a very unique topic in terms of social history. One of my favorite topics when looking at it is women and a lived experience in terms of the gender role. Okay, again, keeping in mind the time and the place of the contents. Again, this is just the way it was back then. Okay, just the way it was back then. So women back then, they were mainly motherhood, and worked in domestic duties. Again, this is all intertwined in all social classes, whether you're rich, poor, middle class, upper class, you name it. All women were in regards to being as mother and just working as domestic duties. Okay, so they were financially despised as women. They worked in textile factories, waitresses, domestic servants, and even some others, officers, nurse, female teachers. Okay, this all goes back into gender stereotype. Okay, gender stereotype where men can only do this, women can only do this. Because you're a man, because you're a woman, you are classified or described as doing this only and that only. Okay, this is just stereotype that was lived by back then. Again, keywords here is mother and in the home. So women daily expectation was housekeeping, being mothers. It could be washing, cleaning, iron, baking, dusting, maiding, all the common house duties that they had to do. Again, domestic servants applies to everyone, but especially the working class and the new immigrants, and they were often paid super less. I like to call this category known as the Victorian ethos. Okay, the Victorian ethos. Again, it was an ideologically formulation driven by the white Protestant middle class folks of the British origin. Okay, again, all this norm of women being in the house, angel in the house, in the private spheres of in the home, all this came in regards to the Victorian era because of the Protestants, middle class of the British origin. They brought this over from Britain and established it into Canadian society. It was basically a code of behavior based on gender Like I said, based on gender, they have specific roles and duties. It was just the way it was back then, based on gender spheres. So women were in the private sphere of in the home, and men were seen as in the public spheres, okay, where they can go out, work in jobs, and do other things in society, whereas women could not, except for taking care of the house, children, and the family. Okay, has to keep that in mind. Okay, so women were basically mothers, worked in the home or house, family, looking after the kids. Those were basically can be classified as expectation for women back then during this time period. Okay. Again, do we see this nowadays? Yes, no. Something that you can argue about. Um, again, just keeping in mind of the context of the time period. We cannot blame men for all this. Again, like I said, it was just simply the way it was based on the time and context, especially when looking at women's history, women's lived experience back then, or any time period for that matter. We're going to wrap things up by looking at this final slide known as the reciprocity issue or the free trade agreement. Okay, the reciprocity issue, page 3 in your textbook. I'm going to talk about this very, very briefly before we close things out. So, reciprocity issue was basically a free trade agreement, foreign policy between Canada and the United States, negotiated in 1911. The goal was basically trade goods back and forth without paying additional taxes. Sounds awesome, right? Okay, which means that Canada and the United States can now trade items back and forth without taxes. Again, sounds great, but some liked it, some did not. Again, I'm looking at history in terms of facts and evidence. There's always different perspectives. Okay, what I think, what you think, what your friend think, what your family thinks could be different, and that's okay. That's great. Okay, that's a part of looking at history. Okay, history is not just looking at the collection of facts, knowledge, and understanding. It's not the whole picture. Okay, that's just the past. History is looking at different perspective, different interpretation, analyzing and evaluating the facts. Hence why what I think, what you think could be different, different point of view, different perspective, which is good, which is awesome. Okay, that's what we want. We're looking at history. So again, with the reciprocity issue, some liked it, some did not. Some saw as Canada becoming raw suppliers from the United States. Some thought it as moving away from trading from east to west in Canada, but now north and south. And some thought it would be better to trade within Canada only. Okay, again, different arguments can be made, but what we need to establish here is that what was the reciprocity issue and whether or not it achieved its goals. Okay, so a lot of materials were talked about in regards to today's class. We're not gonna rush through and go over assignment number 1. I think we'll save that for next class and next week. But before we close things out, just a reminder, next week we're doing back-to-back days in terms of classes. Bonnie and I are switching because Bonnie is away for a workshop or a conference. So next week, week number 2 for this term, Bonnie's taking my Tuesday slot, and I'm taking Bonnie's Wednesday slides. And so that means that PLAR History and Geography next week will be on Wednesday from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. Central Time, and as always and normally on Thursday at this time slot. Okay, so that's next week. I'll send an email out to remind everyone, but that's what's happening next week. So next week, week 2, we'll finish this lesson by going over assignment one questions, and then we'll dive through and look at Canada's involvement and and efforts during World War One. Okay, between 1914 and 1918. That's our goal for next week as we continue to look at lesson number one content. Okay, are there any questions? If there are, again, you know where to find me. Just send me an email, send me a call, Facebook me, email me if you have any questions or need any help. Okay, this has been PLAR History Geography with myself, Jonathan. This has been awesome as we wrap week one up. I'll see everyone next week, week two, on Wednesday in the afternoon, and we'll continue discussing then. In other words, have a good rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.